Every Pokemon in the Pokemon TCG have their own unique attacks that do different amounts of damage for different costs, and some even have additional effects. Some attacks are incredible and can either make or break a certain card, while other attacks are completely useless. However, there have been quite a few cards printed in the TCG that allow you to copy other Pokemon's attacks while also ignoring the energy requirements. One that may instantly come to mind for many players, especially considering its dominance during its legality, is Mew Vmax. Its Cross Fusion Strike attack could copy any attack from your other Fusion Strike Pokemon on the bench, meaning that you could copy something like Genesect V's Techno Blast to deal huge damage, Meloetta's Melodious Echo to deal even more damage depending on how much Fusion Strike energy was in play, or Ice-Q's Block Slider to hit any of your opponent's Pokemon. Plus, you didn't need the required energy for the copied attack, only the energy required for Cross Fusion Strike, compared to a card such as Mewtwo and Mew GX, which could use the attacks of any GX or EX Pokemon on your bench or in your discard, but you still needed the necessary energy for the attack. However, with Mew Vmax, you could just attach a single double turbo energy and instantly start copying attacks and dealing huge amounts of damage. There have been other Pokemon released that do similar things, however, just not as well. Mew EX from 151 for free colourless energy can copy an attack of your opponent's active Pokemon. Clefable from Twilight Masquerade can also do the same thing. While this sounds really strong depending on the matchup, it just isn't really worth it considering both Pokemon are very easy to knock out, and in the case of Mew EX, its attack costs free energy. Plus, it's mainly used for its ability to draw cards rather than the attack itself. Clefable is a little better, only requiring 2 colourless energy, so a single double turbo energy is enough to start attacking, but your opponent can very easily play around this by just putting a Pokemon in the active with a really weak attack. Plus, if you are copying your opponent's Pokemon's attack, they can just one-shot Clefable next turn depending on the Pokemon. And with it being an evolution Pokemon as well, it takes time to get going. Stellar Miracle, the next set being released in Japan, will be introducing a new Pokemon in this group of attack copiers. However, compared to others we have available, this one is much stronger and has the possibility to copy any attack in the game, under the right circumstances of course. That card being Slowking, a 120 HP Psychic type Pokemon with 2 attacks. Its second attack is not even worth mentioning given the sheer power and versatility of its first attack. For 1 Psychic and 1 colourless, the attack reads, discard the top card of your deck. If that card is a Pokemon without a rule box, choose one of that Pokemon's attacks and use it as this attack. Upon first read, you may be thinking that this sounds way too situational and specific to be good, especially considering you have to discard a Pokemon, so what if you don't discard one? Then the attack just doesn't do anything. While that is true, there are multiple cards we can use in order to guarantee we discard a Pokemon, and at the same time, guarantee a specific Pokemon that we want to discard. Cypher Maniac's Code Breaking, Silene, as well as a new stadium card, Knight Academy, coming in Shrouded Fable. Cypher Maniac allows us to put any 2 cards from our deck on top of the deck, meaning that we could put a Pokemon or 2 on top of our deck, specifically a non-Rulebox Pokemon, then we can use Slowking to discard that Pokemon and copy one of its attacks. Silene, on the other hand, lets us toss 2 coins, and for each heads, we can put a card from our discard on top of the deck. This allows us to recycle previously discarded Pokemon, as well as any other cards we might need for future turns. The only downside being you are relying on a coin flip, but it still helps us in possibly guaranteeing that we can copy an attack. And lastly, Knight Academy, a new stadium card, lets us put any card from our hand on top of the deck. So if you happen to draw a Pokemon you want Slowking to copy the attack of, you can just put it on top of the deck and use Slowking's attack to discard and copy said attack. All of this already seems very promising and very strong. However, even with all of this support, what Pokemon should we even be discarding? Given that we can't use Rulebox Pokemon, that means we can't play V, EX or Radiant Pokemon, which all have very powerful attacks, so what exactly do we have? Well, you'll be surprised at just how many options are available despite these restrictions. Conkeldurr from Twilight Masquerade has an attack that deals a massive 250 damage. which is enough to one-hit KO most basic EX and V Pokemon. Chandelier from the same set has an attack that deals 30 damage times the number of cards in your opponent's hand. So if you're up against something like Lost Box or any form of control deck, then you can deal absurd amounts of damage. Orbeetle from Paradox Rift has an attack that deals 30 damage times the number of energy in your opponent's discard, so against a deck like Chien-Pao or Raging Bolt, two decks that discard energy for their attacks, the damage will greatly add up. Crobat from Silver Tempest can deal 30 damage to any Pokemon, which doesn't sound very good, but if it KOs a Pokemon, you take 2 extra prize cards, meaning you could hit something that has already taken damage or something that's very weak, and possibly take 3 or 4 prize cards from one attack. But by far the best card to play alongside Slowking is the new Kyurem coming in Shrouded Fable. Its attack lets you deal 110 damage to 3 of your opponent's Pokemon, which is incredibly powerful and can easily KO multiple Pokemon. But it gets better because if you are up against a Lost Box deck, you can just bench Kyurem and attach an energy to it and use the attack. As thanks to Kyurem's ability, the attack can be used for a single colourless energy if your opponent has a Colress card in their discard. The amount of possibilities this card has is honestly incomprehensible. You could play any Pokemon in this deck and just copy their attack. There are probably dozens upon dozens of Pokemon I forgot to mention because the card is just that versatile. Not to mention that since you are going to be playing Slowpoke, you could also include Slowbro from the Pokemon Go set. For 2 colourless energy, you can just take 2 prize cards if your opponent has 1 prize card remaining. And since you are only playing single prize Pokemon, this condition is very easy to meet, meaning that this card can just suddenly end the game out of nowhere. However, there is one issue with Slowking, that being it needs specifically a Psychic Energy in order to use this attack. Well, this actually isn't an issue at all because Xatu from Paradox Rift exists, letting you attach a Psychic Energy to a benched Pokemon and then draw 2 cards, giving the deck energy acceleration and draw support at the same time. Slowking has everything it needs to be a very powerful and formidable strategy. The only true downside being, depending on how people build the deck, it may tend to be a bit bricky, since the best attacks to copy are on evolution Pokemon, and you won't be playing the pre-evolutions. So the only basic Pokemon you'll be playing are Slowpoke, specifically the 70 HP one, so that you can use Body Puffin, as well as Natu, and Kyurem, which depending on the matchup is a card that you don't really want to bench unless you are up against some form of Lost Box deck. Slowking has everything it needs to be strong and compete. It has access to some very powerful attacks, and on top of that, can use them for very low energy cost. It has access to energy acceleration and draw support. It has access to cards that let you stack your deck, meaning you can guarantee any attack you need. It has access to some sneaky game-ending moves thanks to Crobat and Slowbro. Plus, as new sets come out and more cards are released, the options available for this deck will only increase and increase. The rest of Stellar Miracle has yet to be revealed, so even more Pokemon with strong attacks could be revealed and quickly utilised by this card. Slowking is definitely a very strong and very versatile Pokemon. There are so many different cards you could play in this deck, and over time, I imagine players will continue to discover new techs and new attacks to make for a very formidable deck. While I don't think this card will break the meta or be a top contender, I can see it being a very fun rogue deck. That's not to say it's weak though. Only time will tell how this card and deck is built, what Pokemon are included, and how the deck will evolve and adapt as more and more Pokemon are printed into the game with each new set. Pokemon that on their own seem quite terrible, but for Slowking are some of the most powerful in the game.